Hi, I'm Christina, an international gambling recovery specialist and certified peer.
And I'm Stephen, International Gambling Recovery Specialist as well, along with being a board approved recovery advisor. Welcome.
Yeah, and we're going to do a case study for you. Steven's been doing this for a very long time, and so he's brought us a case that he's going to share, go over, and point out what it looks like to be in action as a peer specialist. So I guess we can go ahead and jump into it. I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how your role has developed through the years of being a peer specialist and what kind of that looks like in your everyday workload.
Sure. So, in my role as a peer counselor, I work for a gambling treatment program called the Better Choice Program. And in that program, we have therapists, recovery support specialists, we call them here, peer counselors. And so we receive our clients in numerous ways, whether they're self-referred, uh, or they call the helpline in our state. And when they do call the helpline and they're whatever type of help they're looking for, and depending on where they're from, they'll be connected with a Better Choice program that's nearest in their region. So, um, quite a few years ago, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, a family called our helpline, and it was a parents calling about their young son gambling, and it trickled down to my program. The call came. So I usually, at my program, I'm usually the one that, when the helpline call comes into our program, I'm the one that talks to the individual, kind of the gatekeeper, and just finding out where they're at. What kind of help are they looking for? Just quickly mentioning that I am a person in recovery, and that the help that we offer at our program, describing the services and help. After they tell and I kind of tell me what's going on, and so they'll share with what's going on, depending on what the call is about. So this particular case is about parents calling for their young son's gambling that had been going on for quite a few years. He was in his early 20s, had been gambling since high school and college, and they had bailed him out a couple of times, and we're to the point where the son said he wouldn't do it again, and again bailed him out again, made the promises how he wouldn't do it again until it happened again. So they were kind of at their wits' end and not knowing what to do. So they reached out. They figured they needed some kind of additional help to find out what's going on and what to do. So I told them again what help was available, and if they were interested, they said, in our program, they said it would be difficult to kind of come in directly. They were busy. They had a lot of other kids at home they were managing and jobs, and so I said it would be helpful if I met you in the community, which I did after hours. I was kind of flexibility in my program, and I was flexible with my time and able to meet them, locally near them. And so I met with the parents, and they filled me in on some more stuff that was going on. I shared a little bit about my story as a person in recovery from gambling, but I also had a significant history of growing up with gambling, how my life was impacted, and how after I stopped gambling, my life was still impacted by gambling because my family history was my dad's gambling. So I did, and how that affected me with bailouts and those type of things. So sharing a little bit of that, making that connection that I did have, that I had experience with this, my own personal experience, which they appreciated that. And so the first question is, well, what would you do? So obviously it's not a short answer, obviously, but I again told about the services that they told me a little more about their son, his type of gambling, how long he was doing it, the types of gambling, the struggles that they were having as a family. What they should they bail him out or not? So I asked them if they would be interested, in help, and they said yes. And so I asked about their son. Is he ready to come? Is he ready to seek help? And they said they weren't sure. He's kind of, they just need to know what to do. So I kind of guided him through that process. I said, well, not knowing whether he was ready or not, I did suggest our family support group, which is I was at the time, it was peer led by myself. So I had a family support group that was mostly spouses at the time. There were a couple of parents in there, which was good. So they committed to that. One of the parents said they would be able to come to that. The time frame worked out and it would be the mom coming in, not the dad. But so they were interested in the family support group, and then at some point they asked me, "Would you be willing to talk to our son?" And I said, "I sure I would." So going forward, they talked to their son. Would you be willing to meet with someone from the program and find out, get some kind of help? So the son was in some hot water financially, and so back was kind of up against the wall. And so I did meet with him again in the community, which I have that flexibility, which is really good. Kind of makes it easier for him. I think, when instead of coming into the clinical environment, having those easy conversations, and again, my job afforded me that flexibility. So a few days later, I did meet with the son to try to find out where he's at. He's, again, qualifying myself as a person in recovery and sharing what that was like, the type of gambling I did, and how it was for me. And his question was, "How did you stop?" And I shared with him, how I stopped, and I was, around his age when I stopped gambling, a little older, but I told him how, I was about 29 when I stopped, and he was in his, I think, 23, 24. And so he asked me what I did. I said, "Well, my recovery pathway is Gamblers Anonymous." And he's like, "Oh," he goes, "Well, I wouldn't do that." And I said, "Why would I?" "Why?" And I said, and he said, I wouldn't want to sit in a room full of degenerate gamblers." So that was like, it just goes to show, like, what you might encounter here. Someone's struggling with gambling, and and they have, that's their view of gambling, the perspective. So I said, "Well, what does one look like?" And he's like, he didn't know what to say. I said, "I go to Gamblers Anonymous," right? So kind of like not mocking him, but kind of just kind of like normalizing it. Well, hey, I'm just a regular guy. I go to Gamblers Anonymous, and I wasn't pushing Gamblers Anonymous by any reason, but I was just kind of laying the groundwork for that. He was like, "Oh,
He
okay,
probably didn't expect, somebody like me, like
yeah,
degenerate gambler,
yeah."
yeah.
So I mean, and I've heard that before. I hear that term used, over the years. Not as much lately, but years ago I used to hear it quite often. So he and I described, and I, again, talking about the services at our program, would he be willing to do? And I talked about therapists. We have licensed therapists trained in gambling, so he was open to the therapy part. He was kind of open to that,
Okay.
and he was okay with my meeting. And then he said, I said, "Would you want to meet again at some point in time after after his official kind of intake he would have with the therapist? I would help facilitate that." So he said he would, and so he wound up meeting, eventually scheduling an appointment with one of our therapists, to get help. In the meantime, and this is kind of being, this is over a period of time, all this stuff taking place. He was coming in, meeting with the therapist regularly. He was a little, I would say, slippery. That's the term we kind of use, like elusive, with their appointments and scheduling. Um, I think he was a little reticent over coming to treatment, or maybe I think it was just relative wanting to stop gambling. I think he had it in the back of his mind, that he wasn't ready to stop. He was kind of contemplative at this point. But the parents were fully engaged. They would reach out to me, asking me questions. Um, there was and the mom was coming to the family support group, and there was another situation with a bookie where a bailout was needed, and so the parents, kind of, they were winging it a little bit. They figured, well, the father would co-sign for a credit card so he could get a cash advance and pay the bookie. They kind of did that on their own. It wasn't something I recommended, but we don't tell them what to do. We just give them options and what they want to do. So again, eventually that didn't work out. It did get, the bill got paid. And the stresses with bookies as well. That's another challenge we face. And I think, being in recovery and a little bit of GA background, the GA background that I have is how do you talk to bookies? And because that's a challenge that comes up a lot. And a lot of therapists don't know about that, what to do with situation. They know about making payment arrangements with credit cards and things like that. And so what do we, they're kind of in a panic. Well, the bookies, they feel maybe a little threatened by them, what the situation is. But you actually can make payment plans with bookies, and depending on who they are, and they just really want their money. So we made a payment plan, with a bookie. They has to facilitate that instead of just erasing the debt. I say erasing the debt isn't working. So we talked about how they facilitated, making a payment plan to eventually to pay the bookie off, which was accepted by the bookie, with the hopes of not continuing to offer options to gamble, which is another story, because they like to continue to give them opportunities to gamble. And so that that helped a little bit, and again the parents staying involved, but again the son continuing to gamble on and off. This was kind of, he would be in he'd be in treatment, and he would be saying he wasn't gambling, but over time the parents started, you know through family support and some of the gambling. It wasn't a gambling on group I ran, but I used some gambling on literature. There was a really helpful guide for the parents of compulsive gamblers, and I think there was some really insightful information in there that was really helpful to kind of guide the parents through this really difficult process. Again, how to have those conversations, how to talk to your loved one, things to say. I think is really important. I think because a lot of times, they're not the parents don't know how to have that conversation with their I'll say their young gambler in this case. And he really guides them through that process, the type of language, what kind of questions to ask. Certainly, instead of have you gambled, how's your recovery going? How are you doing? And so keeping that conversation, making it easy. So if they are struggling, like, oh yeah, I'm struggling, I feel like gambling, they're able to come to their family, loved one with that. So try to help them with that, to keep those communication lines open instead of keeping it inside for the person that gambles. And the parents do get upset. It's not an easy process. One of the things we talk about is, you know, love the gambler, hate the addiction, and so kind of helping them understand that. And I think that's very helpful, type of thing. And so it is a long process. And, again, using my lived experience throughout this, my recovery experience, having a little insight to kind of on both sides, I bring that I always tell them they should pay me double because I do two peer work, so from both sides of the fence. But anyway, so I have that little bit of insight to what the person that's gambling might be thinking, or some of the warning signs to look for, and from being a peer counselor, and then from the family perspective, understanding how they're feeling, and some of the things I did and how difficult it was for me, and some of the things that I managed to do as a son of a kind of reverse son of a gambler, especially with the bailouts and kind of the boundaries were really important. We talk a lot about boundaries, kind of boundaries, those financial boundaries, what's acceptable. Well, and then through this time, we did have a family intervention. The first of like two or three, I think, three, and we had the girl, and there was a girlfriend involved in this too, and she was kind of the outsider, and she was kind of like the weak link. I for lack of a better term, like the weak link in the chain. So we had the parents on board with the financial oversight and the financial intervention, but he would keep his girlfriend at arm's length and not let her know a lot about what was going on. So he had that kind of crack, that,
Yeah.
and so we finally had an intervention where the girlfriend was able to come in, and we talked about what was going on. I did have a therapist at that intervention. He's very good. This particular one, very, very good therapist, trained in gambling, so that was helpful as well. And it didn't go well. It really didn't go well. It was like he felt he he felt a little bit of pressure. The parents were, he stormed out. He stormed
Okay.
out. So again, the parents, they stayed. We talked it out. The parents, again, stayed the course, continued to attend family support group. Again, the girlfriend was able to kind of had a little more insight to what was going on, and her eyes had opened up a little bit. Like, this is something I need to be more involved in. So eventually, she became involved in our family support group. It was a little awkward having the mom and the daughter, but it was really it wasn't. I mean, they were. We talked a lot about, they listened to other people in the group and the things. There was some other long-term members. There was another mom who had similar, issues, which was same age son, type of thing. And again, a lot of these young men that I do work with, they were athletes as well. It seems like their background are, athletes. That statistics do, show that out. And so going forward, the son was in and out of recovery. He would do well, and then he would have a reoccurrence. He would be in and out. And again, it was more about sealing up those financial practices. He always found a loophole to get money, this loophole, that loophole, and money was like the issue. Him getting a hold of money. So finally, and there was a lot of family stuff too. So our final intervention was where we had everybody in, including actually we had a pre-intervention to where we had all the family, who was going to be there, what was going to be discussed. In fact, even the younger siblings were involved in this one to express their feelings on how they felt, how they could see how he changed when he was gambling, how it affected them. And so again, pretty much peer led. So I was very, kind of like, it was a learning experience for me too. But again, having the lived experience part as what we have here, that's what this is about. We could do a lot with our lived experience, and I think that's really important. And we could do a lot of. I mean, certainly therapists are valuable, extremely valuable. But again, that lived experience perspective that we have, that kind of inside baseball thing that we have about gambling is really important. And so we had, we met, we had that pre-meeting, and again, having that intervention, and again, sealing up the financial cracks. I think we talk a lot about money. I think it's really important as peer counselors to know about financial interventions and how to manage that. Because even in Gamblers Anonymous, it's a recovery organization, but since they've been around, they talk a lot about money. They have their own way to handle it. Pressure relief is a really strict budget process. They talk about, the spouse or family members managing money. And so a lot of these interventions work whether you're in Gam-Anon or GA, whatever. People use these, whether they're in those type of recovery programs or not. So it's really important to know what's available and the things that we can do to kind of, seal up those financial cracks, because they people that gamble can be a resourceful lot. They can find their way and find money in a lot of places. So I think that, on our end as family support and loved ones, kind of getting everybody on the same page and just sealing up that. So we're, able to do that. And I think finally, and I met with this individual a couple times in between. He was in and out of, his recovery. His recovery was more meeting with a therapist and maybe an occasional support group at our program. I would text him the 24. I asked clients if would they be interested in me sending them the thought for the day from the GA 24-hour book, if that's something they would like. So I was texting him that on a regular basis for one of the support tools. But again, he was very reluctant till the point where we had that final intervention. The person was facing the loss of a significant relationship with his girlfriend, and they were getting married, and so there was a lot of challenges to the point where finally he realized that he couldn't do it anymore, himself, and he threw in the towel. There was he was running out of ways to get money. He was losing, the thought of losing a significant relationship, and then he actually wanted to go to Gamblers Anonymous. He wasn't pushed towards it. He said, "What else can I do?" He was ready. He was finally ready, kind of his bottom, so to speak, after all the years of challenges to find his way into Gamblers Anonymous, which he found at something that he was so averse to that he actually liked it. When he went there, I guess he didn't, he was ready to hear their message at the time. And it was very helpful. And they got to a point where he was talking about his meeting when he got home, talking about his meeting in group, in the support groups. He was happy to attend, making the connections. He got, he talked about getting his, 90-day, step book, and he was really excited. And, fast forward, it's almost been 2 years since, he's, rock solid in his recovery pathway, which is Gamblers Anonymous. And the parents are still involved, and the girlfriend slash wife now are still involved in support in our family support group, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. With newer people that are coming in, and I think us, you know, through the whole process, I think as peer counselors, I always say, like, as peer counselors, we're like the hope salesman, right? We want to provide that hope because hey, we've been there and done that, and here we are. We've done it. And I think conveying that and showing them that it can be done, and then them passing it on to new people, I think is really important. So I think in being able to do that, and so they're still engaged, and now the father is actually comes all the time too, to the support group, and he really came on board in the later stages. He wasn't not he it wasn't that he wasn't on board, but he didn't want to do the support group part, but now he loves it, and he's like the speaker, he's like you know the, the one that talks even more now than anybody else, and they're all in, and again, it was really really amazing to see, and again the wife. So all three of them are in the support group still, even after their son has kind of moved on, doesn't live with them anymore, and they're still engaged, and they realize how important it is to stay engaged, because they want to be able to recognize if their son is struggling, what they can do, and the stuff that they experienced through all this. And it was a lot as a parent.
Yeah.
They went through a lot, and it was very difficult for them. And I think they realized the importance of support groups, and how it is a process. And even though it was long as it was, they stayed engaged. And again, they provide that hope for other members. So hopefully we're able to convey that to them, and so they can pass it on. I know I probably left out a lot, but I'm sure you're going to ask me questions.
Yeah.
And
Let's get it. Yeah, let's get into some questions. So, how long was this time period with this particular client?
it was about so up to today, like, with him being in recovery, is his couple of years recovery is about 8 years.
So, it was a really long process that you were involved in from beginning to today. Yeah. And I think that that's important to kind of recognize that, sometimes it's going to be an ongoing situation where there's going to be a lot of different parts that are going to be added, like the family members, like relationships. And it's not just necessarily about the person that's in front of us. It's about the wider range, because I think it's been said that somebody impacted by gambling, or somebody gambling. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a wide range, bringing in the people who are gonna support him, but not enable him, and, like, learning all those different associations.
And I think for me, like, having the opportunity to have like even in treatment, having a peer led support group, because there was therapists that were coming and going, and so the group had to go on, whether there was someone that could. And again, I was able to, I was grateful to be able to do that. I found it very helpful for me as well in my own recovery. It was very helpful for my own recovery, and again, guiding and then listening to how they interact, because once they got going and they're sharing amongst themselves, I joke around. I would say to one of them, "I'm going to take Friday off. Can you cover a group for me?" So that's how good they became, with each other, So
Yeah, and so when he first came into the picture, you started with the parents first and then brought him in. So he's probably a little bit blindsided by this, right? Like, his parents bringing in his support, or did he know?
yeah, they talked to him when he the third bailout. They said, "No, you need to get help. We need to find out about this." So they wanted to see what was available. So after they met with me, they said, "Hey, we met with someone. Would you be willing to talk to him?" And so he
Okay.
said yes, but I think he said yes. I can't be sure, but it was more of like a yes to get his parents off his back, and maybe to get that bailout. The back of their mind, I think, how am I going to get out of this? I'm certainly speaking from experience again, so he was willing to do that. And we had a good conversation. Again, it was non-judgmental. I shared a little bit about myself, He asked me about how I stopped gambling. I shared what it was like for me. I asked, again, sharing about the program, what would he be willing to do? And I explained the options. And he said, well, he'd think about meeting with a therapist. And so that's what he did.
And I think it's interesting how his first response to, like, Gamblers Anonymous was like, "I don't think that's the place for me." But he didn't really know, right? He'd never been to a meeting. He's never Yeah, never participated in any elements of the program, probably just didn't know much about it other than that's where people who have a problem with gambling go, which I think is the consensus for a lot of people who've never really experienced or don't even recognize that what they have is a problem, and then now they're kind of in the same boat, whether family members have put them there or they've decided to come to on their own. There is sometimes these preconceived notions of what something is. So how do you it sounds like had the conversation with him about, like, how the program was helpful for you. Um, was that, like, trying to explain your own perspective on the program? How do you do that in a way that isn't pushing them towards a program, it's helping them decide that this program might be worth a shot?
Great question. So I shared, how, Gamblers, and I shared a little bit about my story, how Gamblers Anonymous helped me, how I wound up there. I wound up there through Alcoholics Anonymous because there was someone my gambling. I shared about my gambling, how I was he he I was totally preoccupied with it. It's all I thought about. Even when I wasn't gambling, it's all I thought about. Um and how it was able to help me. I shared about how it was able to help me, get through that, get over it. It offered me hope another way, not to that I didn't have to gamble anymore if I didn't want to, and that I didn't have to make to win to get what I needed in life. And I talked about that and what that meant to me, and how Gamblers Anonymous was able to do that. How it gave me that hope to where, hey, I don't have to do this anymore if I don't want to, and I didn't want to do it, and I was ready to hear their message. And I shared, and again, going back to where when he said, I don't want to go sit through a room full of degenerate gamblers, I would say, well, what does one look like? And so
It's like you kinda challenge that mindset or that thinking a little bit, like, "Well, what does this really look like to you? What is this based off of?" Right? Like, um and so that's a good way to kind of elicit those kind of conversations where you're trying to open them up a little bit more to the possibilities of different resources. Um, because even for Go ahead.
go ahead. No, that was just one option. Like I talked about treatment and support group, and was GA be something you would consider, and then kind of, and so, but yeah, but
Well, and that was kind of my next thought on that is, like, if you do have somebody who's just very, like, thinks that this particular program you're offering or something just isn't for them, I think it's just kind of that importance of knowing all the different resources that are out there. Because I've had similar situations where somebody's like, "That program's not for me. I went, I tried it, I didn't feel for whatever way that it was gonna work for them." And so then it was like, okay, well, just knowing the other things to try, or even things like the podcasts that are available, um, things that at least kind of maybe give them a little idea of what recovery really looks like for a bunch of different people, which is why I like podcasts, not just saying that because, hi, Broke Girl Society, but
I agree with you. This was like 8 years ago, so there was a lot less podcasts and a lot
right.
less social media stuff. But we were just trying to do our best to keep him engaged, whether it was, no matter how it was, whether it was our support group, whether it was GA, whether it was therapist, peer counselor. So we were giving him, at the time, multiple options that we had available to
That
us.
were
And so,
available then.
yeah.
Yeah, and
So
I think you explained that really well, how you just kind of walked him through what the options back then that were available, um, and sometimes that can be challenging though, like, let's just talk about an example. If somebody walked in a similar situation, but they just weren't ready at all to face recovery. So if he had walked in and been like, "Nope, I'm only here because they're making me." Like, how would you navigate that particular situation? If he just showed up and he was like, "I don't even wanna be here."
ask him kind of, why do they want you to come here? What are some of the reasons why they want you to come here? And kind of probing that and listen to some of his answers and asking him some follow up questions on that, a little MI and those type of things, pros and cons versus, him gambling versus maybe making some changes. Not even saying stopping gambling, but just making some changes or reducing the behavior or something, and talking about that.
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the things in this case that really was a big help too, again, was I talk a lot about sealing up the cracks, but the financial stuff, because he always found ways. And I think being knowledgeable as peer counselors, financial, when it comes to, gambling, money is the drug. And I think it wasn't until the parents became knowledgeable of keeping an eye on certain, when they had the oversight with the finances, then it was transferred to the girlfriend. They had access to kind of seeing these changes in whatever they think, the withdrawals or deposits, and some looking for these irregularities, and they could just be explained away. So educating him on those type of things. There was a lot of the financial stuff too, having knowledge of that, because those financial interventions really put the squeeze on the individual. That was, another good tool. But again, he was kind of running out of options again, facing the reality of losing, his significant other, which was a long time significant other. And yeah. And I think he was even still a little, even with facing that until the very end, he was still trying to find ways around to gamble till finally he realized his scorecard read zero. He was running into like a brick wall, no matter which direction he was going in, and this was recovery was the only way out at this point, which was good. So.
So you talked about how the kind of one of the final times that he had gotten himself in a financial situation with his bookie, instead of trying to like parents bail him out or do a quick bailout that wipes the slate clean, worked with them to make a payment plan with the bookie.
Mhm.
And that's kind of it really is about learning all the different um, ways that you can help solve the problem without the clean slate kind of situation. Because sometimes I think the clean slate is just triggering in itself. You're wiping it clean. You're like, oh, okay. So now, for lack of a better term, like the burden is off of me, like it's done. So then it's like you're not really feeling the impact, and it's almost like the impact kind of goes away quicker, and so it's triggering. So then that was great that you're like, well, let's make a payment plan this time so that he's feeling the repercussions of this every month, and like actually building towards a goal of like he's seeing the harm and he's working towards reducing it in a slower way.
Mhm. The other thing, in between all this, before there was legalized online gambling in Connecticut, we did do there was some casino gambling that was going on, periodically with his friends. So we filled out the voluntary self exclusion forms. He did do that. We did that kind of early on in the process, but there are ways around that. But he did do that. So again, having knowledge of that process, voluntary self exclusion, was really important. Helping him through that, printing out the forms, filling them out, helping, getting them notarized. We do have a notary right in our office, so it wasn't like here's the form, go do it. We would do it like right there, so he couldn't have time to think about it and change his mind. So, we would get that done as quick as possible, and then fast forward to the online gambling. It started. We did the online self exclusion. He was still gambling at the time. This was almost 4 years ago when they legalized it in Connecticut. So he's been in recovery for a couple of years. So we were able to, get him to do that. But again, still finding ways to gamble on, offshore sites, other bookies, and those type of things, or with friends. So, but again, it's all about, keep going, keep sealing up those cracks, whether it's financial, whether it's the financial, the self exclusion, educating the parents so they understand, and the loved ones, really, is really key. Just by changing their behavior, it really has an impact on their loved one. Just because their loved one might still be struggling with gambling doesn't mean the things they can do could really have an effect, on helping their loved ones eventually, find recovery.
Absolutely. And I always visualize it. I'm a very visual person, and I visualize it as like being in a boat with leaks. and like you start plugging the boat up to reduce the amount of water coming in. And it's just like sometimes a new leak will spring, and it's like really trying to discover the best way to patch that one as you continue. And then finally you've got a solid boat, and you're just able to move through, right? And so that's kind of how I look at like recovery, as people were in the boat and we're just trying to safeguard the boat and fix the leaks. And sometimes new ones pop up and you've got to figure out what's going to fix it until you're kind of in this solid boat. And it sounds like that's very true for this particular case. Like you started with a sinking boat, and you got everybody in to help, and you plugged the holes, and now him and his family are on a pretty solid ship. And it sounds like he's involved as much in his recovery now as his family was in the beginning.
And he still attends one of our groups at our program and does his GA meeting. So he has a couple types of recovery supports. His family's involved in recovery. So it was a long process, but with the help of my team as well, support of them. I've had the past couple of years I've had good support from been this one significant clinician that my supervisor, who's really great. So we work really great together. So that was very helpful as well, working with him. And I think I'm very fortunate. Even he's a very smart, sharp clinician, but I think having someone that accepts our perspective, you know, as peers and our knowledge and what we bring to the table is really important. So I do have that, which is great. So
Yeah, and I think that that's a really great point to kind of close this out on, is that having that kind of trifecta of care. You've got your peer, your support groups, you've got a clinician involved, and you've got your family support involved. It's like, to get all that support around you. I mean, there's always going to have its challenges, but I think building those relationships and working with therapists too. And I know a lot of people watching this might be on their own, or just individual for recovery coaching purposes. Being familiar with clinicians in your area that work with gambling specific clients, just kind of familiarizing yourself with those local resources will be really helpful, if you're wanting to do peer coaching and for gambling specific in your area.
and I just want to kind of wrap it up with saying I know I work for a program and I have caseloads and various types of caseloads. You don't have to work in a program to do this work. If it's just have the knowledge of like the financial interventions, how important family support is, how getting everybody involved, sealing up the cracks, knowledge of recovery pathways, what to offer them, how to talk to them. Language is really important, non in a non-judgmental way to keep them engaged, whether they're struggling or not, whether they're struggling or not, how to keep them engaged to the best of your ability. And again, it's like I learned all these things. A lot of this stuff, I learned in my years of recovery before I even worked in this field. They just kind of just put all the pieces of the puzzle together, doing the peer counseling work, taking a little bit of this, having a lot of this knowledge already from my lived, growing up with family history of gambling, then a period of time where I did. And then when I stopped, still having that impact from that, my father's gambling. So, using our lived experience again, which I always say is our number one tool, how to use and knowing how to use it. So
Absolutely. And I'm going to say it one last time before we close out, and you've heard it continuously throughout the training. Keep those boundaries in place. They're there for a reason. They're there to protect you, and they're there to protect the people that you're working with. So just, you touched on all the really good ones, and I just want to just keep honing that boundaries in, because that's the most important part that we can do for ourselves, in our own recovery. So thank you so much for watching this case study. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, see you next time.
okay, thank you.